"Your scholarship is being revoked," the academic advisor said coldly as she slid the termination letter across the desk to 19-year-old Marcus Thompson. "Your GPA has dropped below 2.0, you've missed half your classes this semester, and frankly, you don't seem to care about your education." Marcus stared at the paper that represented the end of his dreams, feeling like his life was over. What he didn't know was that a quiet superstar named Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was about to teach him the most important lesson about perseverance he would ever learn. The date was November 18, 2023. Marcus Thompson sat in the sterile academic affairs office at the University of Oklahoma, watching his future crumble in real time. The full-ride basketball scholarship that had seemed like a miracle when he'd received it 18 months earlier was now being stripped away because of his own failures. At 19 years old, Marcus had arrived at OU with big dreams and bigger problems. Growing up in inner-city Detroit, basketball had been his ticket out of poverty, violence, and limited opportunities. His high school coach had called him a diamond in the rough, athletically gifted but academically unprepared for college-level coursework. The transition had been devastating. Classes that required reading comprehension skills he'd never developed, mathematical concepts that built on foundations he'd never learned, study habits that demanded discipline he'd never been taught to cultivate. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything to say for yourself?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, the academic advisor who had tried to help him for months before finally giving up. Marcus looked down at his hands, unable to find words that could explain how completely overwhelmed he felt by everything that college had demanded of him. I tried," he whispered, knowing how pathetic it sounded even as he said it. Dr. Williams's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Marcus, trying isn't enough at this level. We offered you tutoring, study groups, reduced course loads, every accommodation possible. You have to meet us halfway." As Marcus walked out of that office, carrying the termination letter that meant he had 2 weeks to withdraw from the university, he felt like the biggest failure in the world. His scholarship was gone, his dreams were shattered, and he had no idea how to face his family back in Detroit. But what happened that evening would begin a transformation that neither Marcus nor Dr. Williams could have predicted. Unable to sleep and unwilling to call his mother with the devastating news, Marcus found himself in the student center at 11 p.m., mindlessly flipping through channels on one of the common area televisions. That's when he stumbled across a documentary about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that was airing on ESPN. The program was called The Quiet Path to Greatness, and it detailed Shai's journey from a relatively unknown Canadian prospect to NBA superstar. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the basketball highlights. It was a segment about Shai's approach to continuous improvement and mental toughness. "A lot of people think success happens overnight," Shai said during an interview clip. "But real improvement comes from doing small things consistently, even when you don't see immediate results. Every day you have to choose to get a little bit better than you were yesterday." Marcus found himself paying closer attention as the documentary explored Shai's early career struggles and how he had overcome them through systematic preparation and unwavering persistence. The narrator explained how Shai had entered the NBA as a raw prospect who needed to develop his shooting, ball handling, and leadership skills. Instead of being discouraged by his limitations, he had approached each weakness as a problem to be solved through deliberate practice. "I made a list of everything I needed to improve," Shai explained in another interview segment. "Then I created specific drills and exercises to address each area. It wasn't glamorous work, but I trusted the process even when I couldn't see immediate progress." Something about Shai's calm, methodical approach to improvement resonated with Marcus in a way that no motivational speech or academic intervention had ever achieved. But what really captured his attention was a story about Shai's first season in Oklahoma City, when he was recovering from a serious ankle injury that had sidelined him for months. "The doctors told me I might never be the same player," Shai said. "I had a choice: feel sorry for myself, or use the setback as an opportunity to come back stronger. I chose to see it as a chance to rebuild myself from the ground up." The documentary showed footage of Shai's rehabilitation process, spending hours every day on tedious physical therapy exercises, strength training, and skill development drills that seemed boring and repetitive. "People only see the final result," Shai's trainer explained in the documentary. "They see him making clutch shots and leading his team to victories. They don't see the thousands of hours he spent doing mundane exercises that built the foundation for those moments." Marcus watched in fascination as the program detailed Shai's daily routine during his recovery. 6 a.m. strength training, 8 a.m. physical therapy, 10 a.m. skill development, 2 p.m. film study, 4 p.m. conditioning, 6 p.m. meditation and mental preparation. Every single day for 8 months. The trainer continued. "No shortcuts, no excuses, no days off. That's what separates good players from great ones, the willingness to do boring, difficult work when nobody's watching. As the documentary concluded with footage of Shai's return to the court and subsequent all-star selection, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. But what happened next would prove that inspiration without action is worthless. Marcus spent the rest of the night researching everything he could find about Shai's approach to improvement and goal setting. He read interviews, watched video clips, and studied articles about the mental strategies that had enabled Shai's transformation from promising prospect to NBA superstar. The more he learned, the more he realized that his academic struggles weren't fundamentally different from the challenges Shai had faced in basketball. Both required systematic skill development, consistent daily effort, and the patience to trust the long-term process even when immediate results weren't visible. By 3 a.m., Marcus had filled an entire notebook with observations about Shai's methods and how they might apply to academic success. More importantly, he had developed the beginnings of a plan. The next morning, Marcus walked into Dr. Williams's office with a proposal that surprised both of them. "Dr. Williams, I know you've already processed my scholarship termination, but I want to ask for one more chance. Not because I think I deserve it, but because I finally understand what I've been doing wrong." Dr. Williams looked up from her paperwork with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Marcus, we've had this conversation multiple times. What makes you think this time will be different?" Marcus opened his notebook and began explaining his research into Shai's improvement methods and how he planned to apply those principles to his academic challenges. "I've been approaching college like it was supposed to be easy," Marcus said, "but listening to Shai talk about his development process made me realize that struggle isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're pushing yourself beyond your current limitations." He outlined a detailed plan: daily study schedules, specific skill-building exercises for reading comprehension and mathematical reasoning, regular meetings with tutors, and systematic tracking of his progress in each subject area. "Dr. Williams, I'm not asking you to believe that I'll magically become a perfect student overnight. I'm asking for permission to prove that I can follow a process for consistent improvement, just like Shai did when he was rebuilding his basketball skills." Dr. Williams studied the notebook pages filled with Marcus's careful planning and thoughtful analysis of his own academic weaknesses. "Marcus, this is the most comprehensive self-assessment and improvement plan I've seen from any student in my 15 years as an academic advisor. But plans are just plans. How do I know you'll actually follow through?" Marcus's response revealed how deeply Shai's example had affected his mindset. "Because I finally understand that nobody else can do the work for me." Shai didn't become great because his coaches or teammates made him practice. He became great because he chose to do the work that greatness requires, even when it was boring and difficult. However, what happened next would test Marcus's newfound commitment in ways he hadn't anticipated. Dr. Williams agreed to a probationary period that would allow Marcus to keep his scholarship if he could demonstrate consistent improvement over the next 6 weeks. The standards were strict: perfect attendance, minimum GPA of 3.0, and completion of all assignments with satisfactory quality. "Marcus, I want you to understand that this is highly irregular," Dr. Williams explained. "I'm only doing this because your approach seems fundamentally different from your previous efforts. But if you miss a single class or fail to meet any of these requirements, the scholarship termination will be immediate and final." Marcus accepted the terms gratefully, knowing that he was receiving an opportunity that most students in his situation would never get. But implementing his Shai-inspired improvement plan proved to be more challenging than he had anticipated. The first week was brutal. Marcus's daily schedule started at 5 a.m. with reading comprehension exercises, followed by 2 hours of mathematics review before his first class. Between classes, he attended tutoring sessions and study groups. Evenings were dedicated to assignment completion and preparation for the next day's coursework. By Thursday of the first week, Marcus felt overwhelmed and exhausted. The work was even more difficult than he had expected, and he wasn't seeing the immediate improvement he had hoped for. That's when he remembered something else from the Shai documentary: the hardest part isn't starting the process, it's continuing when you don't see results yet. Marcus pulled out his notebook and wrote a quote he had copied from one of Shai's interviews: "Trust the process, especially when the process feels impossible." But what happened during the second week would provide Marcus with his first real test of whether Shai's methods could translate to academic success. Marcus was struggling with a particularly difficult calculus concept that seemed completely beyond his comprehension. After 3 hours of studying with no progress, he felt the familiar urge to give up that had derailed his previous academic efforts. Instead of quitting, Marcus tried applying one of Shai's specific strategies: breaking complex skills into smaller, manageable components. Rather than trying to understand the entire calculus problem at once, Marcus identified the individual mathematical operations involved and practiced each one separately. He spent an hour just on algebraic manipulation, another hour on graphing techniques, and a third hour on basic derivative calculations. By the end of the evening, he still couldn't solve the complete problem, but he understood each individual component much better than before. The next day, during his tutoring session, Marcus was able to ask specific, targeted questions about the areas where he was struggling, rather than the vague, "I don't understand any of this" complaints that had characterized his previous academic help seeking. His tutor, Jennifer Martinez, immediately noticed the difference in his approach. "Marcus, this is exactly the kind of preparation that leads to breakthrough understanding. You've identified the specific skills you need to develop rather than just feeling overwhelmed by the whole concept." Within 2 more days, Marcus had mastered the calculus concept that had seemed impossible just a week earlier. But the real validation of his new approach came at the end of week 3 when Dr. Williams called him into her office for a progress review. "Marcus, I have to admit that I'm surprised," she said, looking through his recent assignment scores and attendance records. "Your performance has improved dramatically, but more importantly, your approach to learning seems completely different from what I observed before." Marcus explained how he had applied Shai's systematic improvement methods to each of his academic challenges, treating skill development like athletic training that required patience, consistency, and trust in long-term processes. "The biggest difference is that I stopped expecting to understand everything immediately," Marcus said. "Shai talks about how he practiced the same basketball moves thousands of times before they became automatic. I'm starting to realize that academic concepts work the same way." Dr. Williams nodded, recognizing something she had rarely seen in struggling students: genuine understanding of how learning actually occurs. "Marcus, what you're describing is metacognition, learning how to learn. Most students never develop these skills, even the ones who perform well academically." However, what happened during week 4 would provide Marcus with his biggest challenge yet. Marcus received the results of his midterm examinations, and despite his improved study methods, his scores were still below his target levels. The mathematics exam in particular had been much more difficult than he had anticipated. For a moment, Marcus felt the familiar despair that had previously led him to give up on academic challenges. But this time, instead of interpreting the setback as evidence of his fundamental inadequacy, he remembered another lesson from Shai's story. During the documentary, Shai had described a particularly difficult stretch during his second NBA season when his shooting percentages dropped significantly despite hours of practice and preparation. "I had to choose between believing that my methods weren't working, or trusting that improvement isn't always linear," Shai had explained. "Sometimes you get worse before you get better, especially when you're trying to change fundamental aspects of your technique." Marcus applied this perspective to his midterm results, analyzing his mistakes not as failures but as information about areas that needed additional focus. He spent the weekend creating what he called mistake maps, detailed analyses of each incorrect answer that identified the specific knowledge gaps or skill deficiencies that had led to the errors. Rather than studying randomly for his next round of exams, Marcus used these mistake maps to create targeted practice sessions that addressed his specific weaknesses. But what happened during week 5 would prove that Marcus's transformation was more than just academic. It was personal. Marcus's roommate Tyler had been watching his dramatic lifestyle changes with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Marcus, I respect what you're trying to do, but don't you think you're taking this whole Shai thing a little too far? You're studying like 12 hours a day. When do you have time to just be a normal college student?" Marcus's response revealed how completely his mindset had shifted. "Tyler, I've been a normal college student for over a year, and it was destroying my future. Shai didn't become great by doing what everyone else was doing. He became great by doing what greatness required." Tyler pressed the issue, suggesting that Marcus's intense focus on academics was unhealthy and unsustainable. "What happens when you burn out from all this studying? You're going to crash harder than before." Marcus had anticipated this concern because Shai had addressed similar questions about the sustainability of his training methods. "The difference between burnout and breakthrough is purpose," Marcus explained, quoting something Shai had said in an interview. "When you're working towards something that really matters to you, the work doesn't drain your energy, it creates energy." But the real test of Marcus's transformation would come during week 6, when Dr. Williams administered the final evaluation that would determine whether his scholarship would be reinstated. The comprehensive examination covered all the material Marcus had struggled with during the semester, plus additional concepts that tested his ability to apply his learning to new situations. As Marcus worked through the problems, he found himself using strategies he had learned from studying Shai's approach to high-pressure basketball situations: staying calm under pressure, trusting his preparation, and focusing on executing one problem at a time rather than worrying about the overall outcome. When he finished the exam 3 hours later, Marcus felt something he had never experienced after an academic test: confidence that he had performed to the best of his current ability, regardless of what the final score might be. But what happened when Dr. Williams called him into her office the following Monday would exceed even Marcus's most optimistic expectations. "Marcus, I need to share your results with you, Dr. Williams said, holding a folder that contained his future. "But first, I want you to know that regardless of these scores, the transformation I've witnessed in your approach to learning has been remarkable." She opened the folder and showed Marcus his scores. 87% in mathematics, 91% in English composition, 85% in history, and 89% in his Introduction to Psychology course. Marcus stared at the numbers, hardly believing what he was seeing. Not only had he met the minimum requirements to keep his scholarship, he had achieved the highest academic performance of his life. "Marcus, these scores represent more than just academic improvement," Dr. Williams continued. "They demonstrate that you've developed learning strategies and work habits that will serve you for the rest of your educational career." But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely: the quiet superstar who had unknowingly provided him with the blueprint for turning his life around. "Dr. Williams, I need to do something before we celebrate. I need to write a letter to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander." That evening, Marcus composed what would become one of the most heartfelt fan letters ever written to a professional athlete. "Dear Shai," the letter began, "you probably receive thousands of letters from basketball fans, but I'm writing to thank you for something that has nothing to do with sports. Your approach to improvement and your attitude toward challenges saved my education and possibly my entire future." Marcus detailed his academic struggles, the scholarship crisis, and how the documentary about Shai's development had provided him with a framework for systematic self-improvement. "I know you'll probably never read this letter, but I wanted you to know that your example of patience, persistence, and trust in long-term processes changed the life of a college student you've never met." However, what happened next would surprise Marcus in ways he never could have anticipated. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a response that began with the Thunder Team logo and Shai's personal signature. "Dear Marcus," the letter read, "thank you for sharing your story with me. Reading about how you applied basketball improvement principles to academic challenges was one of the most inspiring things I've encountered this season." The letter continued with Shai's personal reflections on the parallels between athletic and academic development, and his encouragement for Marcus to continue trusting the process of systematic improvement. "The principles that help athletes succeed: consistency, patience, systematic skill development, and learning from setbacks, apply to every area of life where excellence is possible. Keep doing the work and keep believing in your ability to improve." But the most meaningful part of the letter was Shai's conclusion. "Marcus, you've reminded me that the real value of success isn't just personal achievement, it's the opportunity to inspire others to believe in their own potential for improvement. Thank you for that reminder." Marcus read the letter dozens of times, hardly believing that his basketball hero had taken time to respond personally to his story. But what happened during the remainder of Marcus's college career would prove that Shai's influence extended far beyond a single semester of academic recovery. Marcus continued using Shai-inspired improvement methods throughout his remaining 3 years at the University of Oklahoma. He graduated with a 3.7 GPA, earned a degree in business administration, and was accepted into the university's MBA program. More importantly, Marcus became a peer tutor and academic mentor, helping other struggling students apply systematic improvement strategies to their own educational challenges. "The most important thing Shai taught me," Marcus would tell the students he mentored, "is that improvement is a skill that can be learned and applied to any area of life where you want to excel." Dr. Williams, who had watched Marcus's complete transformation, often used his story as an example when working with other at-risk students. "Marcus proved that academic success isn't about natural intelligence or perfect preparation," she would explain. "It's about developing the right approach to learning and having the patience to trust long-term processes." But perhaps the most meaningful validation of Marcus's transformation came during his senior year, when he was selected to give the commencement address for graduating students who had overcome significant academic challenges. 4 years ago, I was told that my scholarship was being revoked because I had failed to meet the basic requirements of college-level learning," Marcus told the audience of students, families, and faculty members. "Today, I'm graduating with honors and starting graduate school in the fall. The difference wasn't that I became smarter or more talented. The difference was that I learned how to approach improvement systematically, with patience and trust in long-term processes." Marcus concluded his speech with the lesson that had changed everything for him. Sometimes the most important teachers aren't in classrooms or textbooks. Sometimes they're athletes who demonstrate through their own examples that greatness is available to anyone willing to do the work that greatness requires. As Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he thought about the quiet superstar who had unknowingly saved his academic career by demonstrating that systematic improvement was possible in any area of life. After graduation, Marcus sent one final letter to Shai, including a photo of himself in his cap and gown along with a copy of his academic transcript. Dear Shai, the letter read, 5 years ago you helped a failing college student discover that the same principles that make great basketball players can make great students. Today that student graduated with honors and is starting his career as an educator. Marcus never received a response to that final letter, but he didn't need one. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that inspiration becomes transformation only when it's combined with systematic action and unwavering persistence. And in Oklahoma City, where a quiet superstar continued to demonstrate excellence through patience and preparation, they understood that the greatest victories often happen far from basketball courts, in the lives of people who learn to apply championship principles to their own personal challenges. Marcus Thompson had saved his scholarship, earned his degree, and discovered his life's purpose, all because he had learned to trust the process the way Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had taught him through his own example of systematic excellence.